Hey everybody, welcome back for another game break. And before we get started, I don't know why I do this to myself, play games of this type. I just scare the crap out of myself.
Shoot!
I just give myself anxiety, I make myself angry, but I just can't help it, and I always dive back into this type of game. But usually just Resident Evil. I kind of just keep it to that series when it comes to horror games generally, because I can only handle so much. I usually need to watch a sitcom after I'm done playing them or something to relieve the anxiety. But I still really enjoyed my time with Resident Evil 7. And this is the first time I played a first-person survival horror. This was very much a new experience for me in a lot of ways, even though I have played many games in the Resident Evil series. So having said all that, let's get to it and talk about Resident Evil 7. And for the Resident Evil series in general, I generally enjoy the stories, and Resident Evil 7 is really no exception. Generally, the Resident Evil games, they have a good mystery going on, there's always a greater conspiracy at play, and that's very much the case with this game. Even though Resident Evil 7 took more of a haunted house approach to the series, very much like the first game, which I have never played. So very much I feel this game was going back to its roots in a lot of ways, which worked for this game. I was compelled by the narrative. I was very fascinated by the Baker family and their various family members. And I was constantly wondering throughout the game how they got to be the way they are, some of them being particularly messed up. And whenever the story would lead us to members of the Baker family and we would engage with them in cutscenes, I was always super fascinated by them. They always had my undivided attention. And I also enjoyed the main character, Ethan Winters, and the story of his estranged girlfriend and how their relationship ties into the events that are unfolding. So narratively speaking, Resident Evil 7 had my attention the entire game. And in terms of graphics and visuals, Resident Evil 7 did a pretty good job. So the environments were appropriately horrifying, the monsters were grotesque, the gore was cringe-inducing, and the Baker family was creepy as f***. But one thing with the environments was the lighting could be a bit of an issue. And before we even started the game and the game asked us to set our lighting settings, we went a little bit brighter than usual. And even then we ran into some issues. There was one point where my wife was playing and it was so dark and we got so disoriented, we couldn't tell if we were walking in a hallway or walking into a wall. So there are instances like that that will happen. It wasn't to the point where it ruins the game or anything like that, but it did happen enough that we did notice it, and it could be annoying at times. So it is still definitely something worth mentioning because of it. So it can possibly happen to you. Just try not to panic when it does like we did, because I think we got killed because we were just panicking so badly because it got so dark all of a sudden. But at the same time, that is kind of the game doing its job. It just makes the horror and the scariness that much more intense because it could get so dark. So it is a complaint, but at the same time, it did do its work. And speaking of doing its work, the environments, as I said, Resident Evil 7 did a good job. They always had that appropriate horror feel to them. I never felt like I was in a cheery area at any point. The horror mood was there, and it was consistent the entire game. So if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for a consistent horror experience, this game is definitely it. And aside from things popping up and scaring the bejesus out of you at any given moment, one of Resident Evil 7's strongest points in terms of inducing horror is its sound work. When you're walking around a certain area or walking over certain materials, you're going to be hearing certain noises. And part of the time we didn't know if it was ourselves making the noise or something else out in the dark. So that always had us on our toes. All of a sudden we hear a different kind of sound because maybe we walked over maybe some different tiling on the floor or some broken glass or something, and all of a sudden we'd be fully alert looking around to see what's happening. But the thing that got us the most, we'd be walking through an area and all of a sudden the music would start. Resident Evil 7 has some absolutely horrifying music, and as soon as it starts, you know you're in trouble. You know there's something lurking around. So my wife and I, we would panic in a frenzy, which is the last thing you should do, is panic. But generally, once we got our head on our shoulders aligned correctly, we'd find a corner somewhere and we would just be looking at doorways back and forth, waiting for something to come. And usually it would when the music started, right? And then we'd be able to shoot at it, but generally not well, because when it came to combat, if you panic, you're in trouble, because we did that quite a few times and we're not hitting things appropriately and you only have so much ammunition. So the music in Resident Evil 7 and the sound design was pretty damn good. And in the time since Resident Evil 7's release, there's obviously been the Resident Evil 2 remake and the Resident Evil 3 remake. And before those two games came out, Resident Evil 7 was very much the return to the classic Resident Evil gameplay, a return to its roots. And I love that. I love the classic Resident Evil style of gameplay versus the more action-oriented Resident Evil 5 and 6. And I love scavenging for ammunition, really trying to stockpile your items, not trying to be too wasteful, because eventually you will need these items eventually. So it is very much on you to be very careful with the things that you do have in terms of resources. So I like that. I like scrounging for resources. But in Resident Evil 7, the resource management, or your item management, you can only carry so many items at once, I did find a little bit tiresome. Just because my wife and I, we knew that we would have to be careful in terms of the items we carry, because we'd like to be able to pick up everything we encounter and know how to backtrack all the time. And even though we were being careful, we were always getting overloaded in terms of the stuff we were carrying. And generally, we needed to be carrying the things we were carrying on a regular basis. But even though I found the item management a little bit annoying in this game, I still by and large enjoyed the vast majority of it. Enemy encounters were always thrilling. They were always terrifying. There didn't seem to be as many in Resident Evil 7, but I feel like that tied into the more haunted house motif that they were going for in this game. So I totally get it and I understand it. I could have maybe used a few more encounters in terms of engaging with enemies, but the boss fights in this game were another highlight. Some of them were, at any rate. A couple of the boss fights were really well done. They were very engaging. They had unique gameplay mechanics to them. And by and large, I really enjoyed them. The one that I didn't particularly enjoy very much was the final boss encounter. It almost felt like it was on rails. It was very hard to fail, and there wasn't really too much to do with it in terms of a gameplay perspective. I really enjoyed it from a story perspective. I really liked what was going on story-wise, and I like how things wrapped up. But in terms of gameplay, I thought the concluding boss fight was very lackluster, so it almost left it that little bit anticlimactic in terms of gameplay. So for Resident Evil 7, by and large, my wife and I, we got what we wanted out of this game. We got great scares, quite a few of them actually. We had an interesting story with a good mystery. We had creepy as f characters in the Baker family. We had generally fun gameplay with a few hiccups here and there, but nothing to write home about. And the sound design and the music was really good too, in terms of giving you that horror atmosphere. So all in all, I'm glad I played it. I don't know why I do this to myself, and I don't know why I play games like this. They just give me anxiety like I wouldn't believe, but the Resident Evil franchise is still a lot of fun. And if I just keep it to that one series, I won't be doing it on a regular basis to myself. So all in all, I would definitely recommend it. And it just makes me pretty damn excited for Resident Evil 8. Oh man, it's a lot of horror, and in a short period of time, Resident Evil 7, and then in a couple of weeks, Resident Evil 8. Oh, I'm going to need a break after Village. But anyway, as always, thank you for joining me for this review, everybody, and I'll see you next time.